The morning sun cast long shadows across the Quantico training yard as 300 of America's most promising military recruits assembled for what would become the most shocking 47 minutes in the facility's distinguished history. Among them stood a small woman whose unremarkable appearance would soon shatter every assumption about strength, skill, and the dangerous art of hiding in plain sight. Sloane Whitaker clutched her worn canvas backpack as the sea of perfectly pressed uniforms and polished boots surrounded her like an ocean of institutional perfection. Her faded jeans and threadbare jacket marked her as different, an outsider who had somehow wandered into this world of military precision and generational privilege. The morning briefing had just concluded when Beckett Crowley, son of a four-star general and heir to 3 generations of military excellence, spotted what he considered an easy target for entertainment. If you're ready to witness how a single moment can completely transform someone's life and expose the deadly consequences of judging by appearances, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe, because this story will challenge everything you think you know about hidden strength. Beckett's voice cut through the crisp autumn air with the entitled confidence of someone who had never faced real consequences. "Hey, farm girl," he called out, loud enough to draw attention from every recruit within 50 feet. "Did you take a wrong turn from the county fair?" His perfectly styled hair caught the sunlight as he swaggered closer, flanked by his usual circle of admirers who fed off his cruelty like parasites drawn to decay. Sloane's grip tightened on her backpack strap, but she kept walking toward the barracks with measured steps that revealed nothing of the calculation behind her calm exterior. The weight of their stares felt familiar, reminiscent of countless moments when being underestimated had served as both shield and sword. Beckett wasn't finished with his performance, however, and with theatrical flourish, he stepped directly into her path and shoved her backward with enough force to send any normal person sprawling. The impact should have resulted in humiliation, a tumble that would provide the morning's entertainment for his eager audience. Instead, something extraordinary happened in the space between contact and consequence. Sloane's body responded with fluid precision, her left foot sliding back into a perfect defensive stance, while her center of gravity lowered with the unconscious grace of someone whose muscles remembered years of combat training. For exactly 2 seconds, she stood there in a textbook martial arts position that would have been recognizable to any special forces instructor as the foundation of advanced close-quarters combat. Then, just as quickly, she allowed herself to stumble backward, her backpack tearing open and spilling its modest contents across the concrete in what appeared to be clumsy accident. The recruits around them erupted in laughter, but Quinn Merrick, a quiet observer with sharp eyes and an analytical mind, caught that brief moment of perfect balance and filed it away as the first piece of a puzzle she didn't yet understand. Beckett's phone was already out, recording what he assumed would be social media gold. The live stream notification pinged as viewers joined to watch the morning's entertainment unfold. "Look at this, people," he announced to his growing online audience. "They're really scraping the bottom of the barrel for recruits these days. This is what happens when the military goes soft and starts accepting charity cases." The crowd pressed closer, their laughter sharp and cutting as Sloane knelt to gather her scattered belongings. But those paying attention might have noticed the methodical precision with which she collected each item, her hands moving in patterns that suggested muscle memory developed through countless repetitions of equipment checks and inventory procedures. She placed her worn notebooks in a specific order, secured her few personal items in predetermined pockets, and inspected each piece of gear with the subtle efficiency of someone accustomed to military protocols. Camden Doyle, the tech prodigy whose daddy had bought him early admission to MIT before his current military adventure, zoomed in with his phone camera to capture every detail of what he assumed was profound humiliation. "This is going straight to my story," he whispered to Pierce Ellery, whose family connections reached deep into Pentagon corridors. Military incompetence at its finest. But Pierce, despite his privileged background and tendency toward cruelty, possessed enough tactical awareness to notice something others missed. The way Sloane organized her gear suggested familiarity with standard operating procedures that weren't taught in civilian schools. Her movements followed a pattern he recognized from advanced training manuals, though he couldn't quite place where he'd seen it before. Sloane rose from the ground with the same controlled grace she'd shown earlier, her torn backpack secured with a makeshift repair that transformed damaged equipment into functional gear through quick, practiced knots. The repair technique itself was telling, the kind of field-expedient solution taught in survival courses that most of these recruits wouldn't encounter for months. Beckett stepped closer, his confidence growing with each laugh from his audience. "Seriously though, sweetheart," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "What's your story? Did you win some kind of lottery ticket to get in here? Because looking at you, I'm thinking there's been a massive administrative error." The other recruits nodded and chuckled, their tribal instincts activated by the spectacle of someone being marked as different, as lesser. The response Sloane gave was barely audible, delivered without looking up from securing her repaired pack. "I applied like everyone else." Her voice carried no emotion, no defensiveness, just the flat statement of fact that somehow made Beckett's elaborate cruelty seem petty and small by comparison. This lack of reaction only fueled his need for a more dramatic response. Military brats like Beckett thrived on emotional responses, on seeing their targets crack under pressure. Sloane's calm indifference was infuriating because it suggested she either didn't understand the social dynamics at play or simply didn't care about them. Either possibility threatened his position as the undisputed alpha of their training group. The morning progressed with standard orientation procedures, but whispers followed Sloane through every formation. Her worn clothing and modest demeanor marked her as an outsider in a culture that valued appearance and pedigree almost as much as actual capability. During the equipment distribution, Quartermaster Sergeant Mills looked her over with barely concealed disdain. "What size uniform, recruit?" he asked, his tone suggesting he'd rather be issuing gear to someone more deserving of military resources. "Medium regular, Sergeant," Sloane replied, her posture unconsciously shifting to attention despite the informal nature of the interaction. The response was automatic, delivered with the crisp precision of someone familiar with military courtesy protocols. Sergeant Mills paused, his experienced eye noting the subtle shift in her bearing. 20 years of dealing with recruits had given him an instinct for reading people, and something about this woman's response pattern suggested prior exposure to military culture. But her civilian clothes and unremarkable background check indicated no previous service, creating a disconnect that left him momentarily puzzled. The cafeteria incident occurred during the first meal service when hunger and exhaustion had lowered everyone's social filters and amplified their tribal behaviors. Arden Hollis, a former collegiate wrestler whose athletic achievements had earned her fast-track admission to the program, spotted Sloane sitting alone at a corner table with her regulation meal tray and standard-issue utensils arranged in neat parallel lines. The precise arrangement of her eating implements followed military dining protocol with such exactness that it could only result from extensive prior training or obsessive attention to detail. Most recruits ate with casual disregard for placement and procedure, but Sloane's tray looked like a demonstration model for proper mess hall etiquette. Arden approached with the confident swagger of someone who had dominated athletic competitions through a combination of skill and psychological intimidation. Her wrestling background had taught her to identify weakness and exploit it ruthlessly, and Sloane's isolated position made her an irresistible target for establishing dominance within the group hierarchy. "Mind if I sit here?" Arden asked, though she was already sliding her tray onto the table before receiving permission. Her movements were deliberately aggressive, designed to crowd Sloane's space and create discomfort through proximity and body language. Sloane glanced up briefly, acknowledged the intrusion with a slight nod, and returned to her meal without engaging in conversation. This dismissive response triggered Arden's competitive instincts, as being ignored represented a challenge to her established position within the social pecking order. "You know," Arden said, her voice pitched to carry to nearby tables, "I'm curious about your training background. What kind of preparation did you do before coming here?" The question sounded innocent enough, but her tone carried an undercurrent of mockery that suggested she already knew the answer would be inadequate. The response came without hesitation or defensiveness. Physical conditioning, basic military knowledge, weapons familiarization. Sloane delivered this information while continuing to eat, her attention seemingly focused on her meal rather than the social dynamics unfolding around her. Arden's eyebrows rose in surprise. Weapons familiarization wasn't typical preparation for civilian recruits, who usually arrived with minimal exposure to military equipment beyond what they'd seen in movies or video games. The casual way Sloane mentioned this advanced preparation suggested either extensive civilian shooting experience or something more specialized. "Weapons familiarization?" Arden repeated, her voice taking on a sharper edge. "Like what exactly? Did Daddy take you hunting on weekends?" The sarcasm was thick enough to cut with a knife, but Sloane's expression remained unchanged as she continued eating with mechanical precision. Instead of responding to the provocation, Sloane reached for her water glass with her left hand while simultaneously using her right to cut her food, a ambidextrous coordination that spoke to years of tactical training designed to maintain weapon readiness even during routine activities. The movement was subtle but unmistakable to anyone with military combat experience. Quinn Merrick, sitting 2 tables away, caught the significance of this coordination and added it to her growing collection of inconsistencies surrounding Sloane's background and capabilities. Former athletes like Arden might possess raw physical ability, but the kind of ambidextrous precision Sloane displayed required specific training that wasn't available through civilian channels. Frustrated by Sloane's refusal to engage with her taunts, Arden decided to escalate the situation through direct physical confrontation. With calculated clumsiness, she knocked over her own drink, sending orange juice cascading across the table toward Sloane's meal tray. The liquid spread quickly, threatening to ruin Sloane's food and create the kind of mess that would require public cleanup and personal humiliation. Sloane's reaction time was extraordinary. Her hands moved with lightning speed to secure her tray and protect her meal from contamination, but more importantly, her body's initial response was pure combat instinct. For a fraction of a second, her muscles tensed into a defensive posture, while her eyes quickly assessed potential threats and escape routes with the systematic thoroughness of someone trained in close-quarters combat scenarios. The moment passed so quickly that most observers missed it entirely, but Quinn caught the telltale signs of tactical thinking under pressure. Sloane's response pattern suggested she'd been trained to evaluate and respond to potential ambush situations, a skill set that civilian shooting courses and weekend hunting trips simply didn't provide. After securing her meal, Sloane began cleanup procedures with the same methodical efficiency she'd shown throughout the day. She used her napkin to contain the spill, prevented further spread with strategic placement of available materials, and managed the situation without drawing additional attention to herself or escalating the conflict with Arden. "Oops," Arden said with theatrical innocence, her voice carrying just enough volume to ensure nearby tables heard the exchange. "Sorry about that. Butterfinger move on my part." Her smile was predatory, designed to convey that the accident had been entirely intentional while maintaining plausible deniability. Sloane finished cleaning the mess, disposed of her materials properly, and resumed eating without acknowledging Arden's false apology or giving her the satisfaction of an emotional response. This calm professionalism in the face of obvious provocation was more unnerving than anger would have been, suggesting a level of emotional control that came from extensive stress inoculation training. The afternoon brought their first formal evaluation in the form of a marksmanship assessment designed to establish baseline shooting capabilities for each recruit. The exercise took place at the facility's premier rifle range, where electronic targets provided instant feedback on accuracy, timing, and technique. Most recruits approached the exercise with nervous energy, understanding that their performance would influence future training assignments and overall program standing. Camden Doyle positioned himself at a computer terminal adjacent to the scoring system, his fingers dancing across the keyboard with the fluid expertise of someone who viewed technology as an extension of his own nervous system. His reputation as a digital prodigy had preceded him to Quantico, where his family connections and technical skills had earned him informal access to various computer systems throughout the facility. As each recruit completed their shooting sequence, Camden monitored the electronic scoring data with keen interest. His plan was elegantly simple: identify the strongest performers and ensure their scores were subtly degraded through minor system modifications that would be difficult to detect during routine data reviews. By undermining potential competition, he could secure his own position near the top of class rankings without actually improving his own capabilities. When Sloane stepped up to the firing line, Camden paid particular attention to her target designation and scoring parameters. Her worn clothing and modest demeanor suggested she would likely perform poorly, making her an unlikely candidate for score manipulation. However, her systematic equipment check and professional weapon handling immediately caught his attention as indicating potential competence that might surprise their instructors. Sloane's pre-firing routine followed military protocols with precision that suggested extensive prior training. She verified her sight alignment, checked her breathing control, and established her firing position with movements that were automatic rather than conscious. Each action flowed seamlessly into the next, creating a rhythm that spoke to thousands of hours of practice under professional instruction. The first shot rang out with mechanical precision, followed by 4 more rounds delivered at intervals that demonstrated perfect timing control. Electronic displays showed each projectile striking within millimeters of the target center, creating a shot group that would have impressed even veteran marksmen. The consistency of her accuracy was remarkable, suggesting not just natural talent, but refined technique developed through advanced training programs. Camden watched the scoring data populate in real time, his amazement growing with each perfect hit. Sloane's performance was exceeding even the best scores recorded by recruits with extensive civilian shooting backgrounds. Her accuracy levels were approaching those typically seen only among military personnel with years of specialized training and combat experience. Reacting quickly to this unexpected development, Camden initiated his sabotage protocol, introducing subtle errors into Sloane's scoring data that would lower her recorded performance without triggering automatic system alerts. He reduced several perfect shots to near misses, adjusted timing penalties to suggest rhythm problems, and modified her overall accuracy rating to place her in the bottom third of class performers. The manipulation was sophisticated enough to appear as legitimate system data, but crude enough that careful examination would reveal inconsistencies between actual performance and recorded results. Camden's technical skills were impressive, but his understanding of military scoring systems was limited by his civilian background and overconfidence in his own abilities. Sawyer Price, observing from the safety officer position, witnessed both Sloane's exceptional performance and Camden's suspicious activity at the computer terminal. His position afforded him clear views of both the actual target results and the electronic scoring displays, allowing him to detect the discrepancies between reality and recorded data. However, Sawyer's own background as a scholarship recipient from a working-class family made him reluctant to challenge someone with Camden's social connections and technical reputation. Speaking out against obvious cheating would require him to accuse a fellow recruit of serious misconduct, potentially creating powerful enemies within their training group and beyond. When the official scores were announced, Sloane's name appeared near the bottom of the performance rankings despite having delivered what was arguably the best shooting demonstration of the entire afternoon. She received the news without visible reaction, accepting the poor evaluation with the same stoic calm she'd shown throughout all previous challenges and humiliations. This lack of protest or surprise at the obviously incorrect scoring was perhaps the most telling detail of all. Someone who had actually performed poorly would likely have been pleased with their results, or at least relieved to have completed the exercise without complete failure. Sloane's indifference suggested she knew exactly how well she'd performed and understood that the recorded scores didn't reflect reality. During the afternoon break, a distant sound echoed across the training complex that caused Sloane to react in a way that revealed yet another piece of her hidden background. Somewhere across the base, a formation was practicing drill movements, and the faint sound of cadence calls carried on the wind. Upon hearing the rhythmic commands, Sloane automatically straightened to attention, her body responding to ingrained conditioning before her conscious mind could intervene. The response lasted only a moment before she caught herself and resumed a casual posture, but Quinn had been watching and noted this involuntary military bearing. Civilian recruits didn't typically respond to distant drill commands with automatic precision, suggesting Sloane had been exposed to military culture in ways that weren't reflected in her official background documentation. Evening brought the day's final challenge in the form of equipment inspection and organization, a routine procedure designed to establish standards for personal gear maintenance and storage. Each recruit was responsible for arranging their issued equipment according to specific protocols that emphasized organization, cleanliness, and immediate accessibility. Pierce Ellery, whose family connections included 3 generations of Pentagon officials and defense contractor executives, had positioned himself as an unofficial leader within their training group through a combination of knowledge, connections, and strategic manipulation of social dynamics. His approach to leadership involved identifying and eliminating potential threats to his position, which made Sloane's growing reputation for quiet competence a matter of concern. During the inspection process, Pierce conducted a deliberately thorough examination of Sloane's gear arrangement, searching for violations that could be used to undermine her standing with instructors and fellow recruits. Her equipment was organized with military precision that exceeded standard requirements, but hidden among her personal items was something that would provide exactly the leverage Pierce needed. Nestled between regulation toiletries and personal correspondence was a communication device unlike anything typically carried by civilian recruits. The equipment was compact, ruggedized, and featured encryption capabilities that were clearly military grade. More importantly, it wasn't included on the approved equipment list that governed what recruits were permitted to possess during training. Pierce's discovery of unauthorized communication equipment created an immediate security concern that demanded official investigation. Military facilities maintained strict policies regarding electronic devices, particularly those with encryption capabilities that could potentially compromise operational security or training protocols. Finding such equipment in the possession of an unofficial recruit represented a serious violation that could result in immediate dismissal from the program. "Well, well," Pierce announced loudly enough to draw attention from nearby recruits and any instructors within earshot. "Look what we have here." He held up the device with theatrical flourish, ensuring maximum visibility and impact from his discovery. The communication equipment drew immediate attention from everyone present, its obviously sophisticated nature raising questions about how a supposedly civilian recruit had acquired such advanced technology. The device's military-grade construction and encryption capabilities were readily apparent even to casual observation, making it impossible to dismiss as standard commercial electronics. Colonel Reese Whitman, whose 25-year career had included multiple combat deployments and extensive experience with classified equipment, approached the situation with professional gravity. His trained eye immediately recognized the device as specialized military hardware that wasn't available through civilian channels or standard procurement procedures. "Recruit Whitaker," Colonel Whitman's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Please explain how you came to possess this equipment and why it wasn't declared during your initial processing." His tone was carefully neutral, avoiding accusation while demanding immediate clarification of what appeared to be a serious security violation. The attention of every recruit within 50 feet focused on Sloan as she stood surrounded by scattered gear and faced with direct questioning from the facility's commanding officer. The moment carried weight that extended far beyond simple equipment violations, representing a crossroads where her carefully maintained cover might finally be blown by circumstances beyond her control. Sloan's response was delivered with the same calm precision she'd shown throughout every previous challenge. "The device was issued to me during previous training, Colonel. I maintain possession according to standing orders regarding classified equipment security." Her explanation was technically accurate while revealing nothing about the nature of her previous training or the authority that had issued those standing orders. Colonel Whitman's expression shifted from professional concern to sharp interest as the implications of her response became clear. Standing orders regarding classified equipment security weren't typically given to civilian recruits, suggesting background and training that weren't reflected in Sloan's official documentation. The discrepancy between her apparent civilian status and possession of military-grade equipment created questions that demanded immediate investigation. Pierce sensed victory within his grasp as the situation escalated beyond simple equipment violations into potential security breaches that could result in immediate dismissal and possible legal consequences. His smile was predatory as he addressed the assembled crowd, ensuring maximum impact from what he perceived as Sloan's downfall. "So you're admitting to possessing unauthorized military equipment?" Pierce's voice carried across the yard, ensuring his words reached every recruit present. "Equipment that isn't on any approved list and represents a serious security violation?" His accusation was designed to force Sloan into either admitting wrongdoing or providing explanations that would reveal information she'd clearly been trying to conceal. The silence that followed was heavy with tension as Colonel Whitman considered the situation before him. A recruit with no official military background possessed classified communication equipment and claimed authority to maintain such possession through standing orders that weren't documented in her training file. The inconsistencies suggested either serious administrative errors or something far more complex than a simple equipment violation. Beckett, sensing an opportunity to capitalize on Sloan's apparent predicament, stepped forward with his phone already recording. His live stream audience had grown throughout the day as word spread about the entertainment value of watching military recruits struggle with training challenges and social conflicts. "This is insane," Beckett announced to his online viewers while ensuring his commentary was loud enough for physical spectators to hear. "They're really going to let some random civilian carry around military secrets? This is exactly what's wrong with modern military standards. No security, no standards, just political correctness run wild." Camden nodded in agreement, his earlier success with score manipulation giving him confidence to pile onto what appeared to be certain victory over someone he'd never considered a legitimate threat. "She's been suspicious all day. he added helpfully. Acting like she knows things she shouldn't know, carrying equipment she shouldn't have. There's something seriously wrong with this whole situation. The crowd of recruits pressed closer, sensing drama and eager to witness what appeared to be the culmination of a day filled with mounting tensions and unresolved conflicts. Their faces showed mixtures of anticipation, schadenfreude, and genuine concern as they watched someone they'd dismissed as irrelevant face what appeared to be career-ending consequences. Colonel Whitman raised his hand for silence, his gesture immediately stopping all conversation as the assembled recruits recognized the authority behind his command. The weight of decision hung in the air as he considered information, regulations, and implications that extended far beyond simple training protocols. "Recruit Whitaker," he said finally, his voice carrying the finality of official judgment. "You are hereby suspended from all training activities pending a complete investigation into this security violation. Report to the administration building for processing and prepare for immediate dismissal from the program." The words hit like physical blows, each syllable carrying the weight of institutional authority and the power to destroy carefully constructed plans for military service. Pierce's smile widened as he savored what appeared to be complete victory over someone who had dared to challenge the established social order through her mere presence and quiet competence. Arden pumped her fist in triumph, her earlier humiliation at the cafeteria finally avenged through this public downfall of someone she'd never considered worthy of respect or consideration. The vindication felt sweet after hours of being unable to provoke any meaningful response from her target. Camden stepped forward to record the final moments of what he perceived as entertainment value, his phone capturing Sloane's face for posterity and social media distribution. The image would serve as proof of his own superiority and evidence that merit, breeding, and proper connections would always triumph over pretension and fraud. But Sloane's expression remained unchanged, her face showing neither defeat nor concern as she faced the apparent end of her military aspirations. If anything, her bearing seemed to straighten slightly, as though the official accusation had lifted some burden she'd been carrying throughout the day. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire ready to snap, heavy with implications that none of the assembled recruits could fully understand. In exactly 47 minutes, this moment of apparent triumph would be remembered as the beginning of the most spectacular reversal in Quantico's history. Colonel Whitman turned toward the administration building, expecting Sloane to follow in accordance with his direct orders. The other recruits began to disperse, their entertainment concluded, and their sense of social order restored through the elimination of someone who had never quite fit their expectations or assumptions. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and different drama, but tonight belonged to the victors who had successfully identified and eliminated what they perceived as weakness masquerading as strength. The natural order had been preserved, and merit had triumphed over pretension, or so they thought. The walk toward the administration building stretched like a death march, each step carrying Sloane further from her carefully constructed new life and closer to questions she wasn't prepared to answer. Behind her, the satisfied murmur of recruits discussing her downfall created a soundtrack of vindication for those who had never believed she belonged among them. But Quinn Merrick couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental was wrong with this entire scenario. The mathematical precision of Sloane's movements, the unconscious military bearing, the specialized equipment that suggested training far beyond civilian experience, all pointed toward a reality that didn't match the surface narrative of disgrace and dismissal. Sawyer Price wrestled with his own conscience as he watched the procession move toward what appeared to be inevitable conclusion. His working-class background had taught him the value of speaking truth even when it carried personal cost. But challenging Camden's manipulation would require him to step forward and accuse someone with powerful family connections of serious misconduct. The weight of moral responsibility finally overcame his concerns about social consequences. "Colonel Whitman, sir," Sawyer called out, his voice cutting through the murmured conversations of dispersing recruits. "Permission to speak regarding the marksmanship scores, sir." Colonel Whitman paused, his hand already on the door handle of the administration building. The interruption was unexpected, and Sawyer's formal military address suggested something more significant than casual commentary on training results. "Proceed, recruit," the colonel replied, his tone indicating willingness to hear relevant information while maintaining skepticism about delays in processing what appeared to be a clear-cut security violation. Sawyer stepped forward, his nervousness evident but his resolve solid. Sir, I observed discrepancies between actual target performance and recorded scores during today's marksmanship evaluation, specifically regarding Recruit Whitaker's results. His words carried the careful precision of someone who understood the implications of formal accusations within military structures. The announcement sent ripples through the assembled crowd as recruits realized they were witnessing something more complex than simple equipment violations. Camden's face went pale as he understood that his sophisticated score manipulation had been detected by someone with both opportunity and willingness to report misconduct. "Explain these discrepancies," Colonel Whitman commanded, his attention now divided between the security violation he'd been investigating and potential training irregularities that could affect the integrity of their entire evaluation system. Sawyer pulled out his phone, displaying video footage he'd recorded from his safety officer position. "Sir, this shows Recruit Whitaker's actual target performance compared to the electronic scoring display. The visual evidence demonstrates perfect accuracy that wasn't reflected in her official results." The video played on Sawyer's small screen, but even from a distance the contrast was obvious. Sloane's shots had created a tight cluster in the target center, while her recorded scores indicated scattered misses and timing violations. The discrepancy was so obvious that it could only result from deliberate manipulation rather than system malfunction. Colonel Whitman examined the footage with the careful attention of someone whose career depended on accurate assessment of personnel capabilities. His expression grew increasingly stern as the evidence of tampering became undeniable, representing not just individual misconduct, but a fundamental attack on the integrity of their training and evaluation systems. "Where were you positioned to record this footage?" the colonel asked, his tone suggesting that Sawyer's testimony would be subjected to rigorous scrutiny before any conclusions were drawn about the allegations he was making. "Safety officer station, sir. Standard protocol requires visual monitoring of all shooters to ensure range safety and verify scoring accuracy. I recorded multiple sequences showing discrepancies between observed performance and electronic results." Sawyer's response demonstrated understanding of proper procedures and legitimate authority to monitor training activities. Camden stepped backward, his earlier confidence evaporating as he realized the sophistication of his electronic manipulation hadn't been sufficient to avoid detection by careful human observation. His technical skills had been impressive, but his understanding of military oversight procedures had been fatally inadequate. "This is ridiculous," Camden protested, his voice rising with panic as he felt control of the situation slipping away. "Why would anyone believe some random recruit over official electronic scoring systems? There's obviously been some kind of mistake or misunderstanding." But Colonel Whitman was already accessing the range computer system through his own administrative credentials, his fingers moving with the efficiency of someone familiar with military data management protocols. Within minutes, he'd located the raw scoring data and identified the unauthorized modifications that Camden had made to Sloane's results. The electronic evidence was damning in its clarity. Login timestamps matched Camden's range time, modification patterns indicated systematic score reduction, and the technical fingerprints of unauthorized access were clearly visible to anyone with appropriate system knowledge and security clearance. "Recruit Doyle," Colonel Whitman's voice carried the weight of absolute authority and barely contained anger. "You are hereby placed under investigation for tampering with official training records, violation of computer security protocols, and conduct unbecoming of a military recruit. Report to the detention facility immediately." Camden's world collapsed in real time as military police appeared to escort him away from the training area. His family connections and technical reputation couldn't protect him from the physical evidence of misconduct that threatened the integrity of military training systems. Pierce watched his allies' downfall with growing unease, understanding that the carefully orchestrated campaign against Sloane was unraveling in ways that could expose his own role in coordinating harassment and manipulation. The revelation of score tampering cast doubt on all previous accusations and suggested systematic misconduct that extended beyond individual grievances. "This doesn't change anything," Pierce announced desperately, trying to regain control of a narrative that was slipping beyond his influence. She still possessed unauthorized military equipment, which represents a serious security violation regardless of her shooting scores. Sloane had remained silent throughout the entire exchange, watching the proceedings with the same calm detachment she'd maintained throughout the day's challenges. Her expression showed neither vindication at Camden's exposure nor concern about the ongoing investigation into her own equipment possession. Colonel Whitman found himself facing a more complex situation than he'd initially understood. The score tampering revealed coordinated misconduct that suggested broader problems with recruit behavior and training integrity, while Sloan's equipment possession remained an unresolved security concern that demanded immediate attention. "The investigation into unauthorized equipment remains active," he announced, his voice carrying official finality. "However, given the evidence of systematic score manipulation, all training evaluations from today will be reviewed and corrected as necessary." Beckett sensed the shift in momentum and decided to force a resolution through direct confrontation. His privileged background and family connections had always allowed him to navigate challenges through aggression and social pressure, and he wasn't prepared to accept that these tactics might fail against someone he'd dismissed as insignificant. "This is insane," Beckett declared, his voice rising to ensure maximum impact from his words. "We're supposed to believe that Little Miss Nobody here is some kind of secret agent because she carries fancy electronics? I say we settle this the old-fashioned way." The challenge hung in the air like a physical presence as recruits understood they were witnessing something that could define the social hierarchy of their training group for months to come. Beckett's proposal for direct physical confrontation represented a return to primitive dominance displays that bypassed complex questions about equipment and authority. Pierce seized on this opportunity to redirect attention away from system tampering and back toward personal conflict that played to their group's traditional strengths. "Physical assessment," he suggested with false reasonableness. "Hand-to-hand combat evaluation. If she's really qualified to be here, she should be able to handle basic military training." The suggestion carried just enough legitimacy to seem reasonable while providing a framework for what was essentially sanctioned harassment disguised as official evaluation. Military training did include combat assessment, making it difficult for Sloan to refuse without appearing to avoid legitimate testing of her capabilities. Colonel Whitman found himself caught between proper investigation procedures and the practical reality of maintaining order among recruits whose competitive instincts had been triggered by the day's various conflicts and revelations. A controlled combat assessment could provide useful information while allowing tensions to be resolved through physical rather than administrative means. "Very well," he announced after considering the various factors involved. "Hand-to-hand combat evaluation. Standard rules, safety protocols in effect." His decision represented a compromise between thoroughness and expedience that would allow immediate resolution of questions about Sloan's actual capabilities. The training yard transformed into an impromptu arena as recruits formed a circle around the designated combat area. Phones appeared to record what everyone expected would be either embarrassing defeat for someone who'd been masquerading as qualified, or surprising competence that would validate the day's growing pile of evidence suggesting hidden capabilities. Pierce stepped forward as Sloan's opponent, his confidence boosted by significant advantages in size, reach, and apparent physical conditioning. His family's military connections had provided access to advanced training that most civilian recruits never experienced, and his systematic approach to eliminating competition had prepared him for exactly this kind of direct confrontation. "Last chance to back down," Pierce offered with false generosity, his voice carrying enough volume to ensure everyone heard his apparent willingness to spare her from humiliation. "No shame in admitting you're out of your league here." Sloan's response was delivered without emotion or hesitation. "Proceed with the evaluation." Her voice carried the same flat professionalism she'd maintained throughout every previous challenge, suggesting this development was simply another item to be handled rather than a significant threat to her safety or standing. The fight began with Pierce's aggressive rush forward, his training and size advantage deployed in a combination designed to overwhelm smaller opponents through superior reach and physical power. His technique was solid, reflecting years of instruction and practice, but his approach relied on conventional tactics that assumed his opponent would respond according to standard defensive patterns. Sloan's initial response appeared to validate his strategy as she seemed to stumble backward under his assault, her smaller frame apparently unable to withstand his systematic attack. For several seconds, the engagement looked like a textbook demonstration of how superior size and training would inevitably triumph over pretension and luck. But observers paying careful attention might have noticed that Sloan's apparent defensive struggles followed patterns that seemed almost choreographed in their precision. Her movements created distance and positioning that drew Pierce further into aggressive overextension while maintaining perfect balance and spatial awareness that suggested tactical thinking rather than desperate reaction. The reversal came with lightning speed that caught everyone, including Pierce, completely off guard. As he committed to what should have been a finishing combination, Sloane's defensive positioning suddenly transformed into offensive action that demonstrated capabilities far beyond anything civilian training could provide. Her counterattack was a masterpiece of tactical efficiency that used Pierce's own momentum and positioning against him while requiring minimal effort on her part. Within seconds, their relative positions had completely reversed, with Pierce finding himself restrained and controlled by someone whose technical skill clearly exceeded his own, despite her apparent physical disadvantages. But the true revelation came when Pierce's aggressive grappling tore Sloane's regulation shirt, exposing her shoulder blade and the intricate tattoo that marked her as something far beyond what anyone had imagined possible. The image was immediately recognizable to anyone with sufficient military experience and security clearance to understand its significance. Etched in stark black ink across her shoulder was a coiled serpent wrapped around a human skull, its fangs dripping venom in artistic detail that spoke to professional craftsmanship and serious symbolic meaning. But more important than the artwork itself was the specific design elements that identified it as the mark of Venom Strike Unit, an elite special operations group that had been officially disbanded 5 years earlier. The silence that followed was absolute and immediate, as every person present understood they were looking at something that shouldn't exist. Venom Strike had been classified at levels that made most military personnel unaware of its existence, and its members had been declared killed in action during a mission so secret that even its basic parameters remained unknown to most government officials. Colonel Whitman's face went completely white as recognition struck him like a physical blow. His 25-year military career had included enough classified briefings and high-level assignments to understand exactly what he was seeing, and the implications threatened to overwhelm his ability to process the situation rationally. "Who are you?" he whispered, his voice carrying a mixture of awe and terror that reflected his understanding of what Venom Strike operatives had been capable of accomplishing. "Who are you really?" The question hung in the air like a physical presence, as every recruit present realized they had been witnessing something far more significant than training conflicts and personality disputes. The woman they had dismissed, mocked, and underestimated was revealing herself to be something that existed in the realm of legend and classified operations that most people never encountered. Sloane straightened slowly, her torn shirt hanging loose around the revealed tattoo, her bearing subtly shifting from defensive positioning to something that radiated quiet authority and lethal competence. For the first time since arriving at Quantico, she allowed her true nature to show through the carefully constructed facade of civilian ordinariness. "Operative Cobra 7, she said simply, her voice carrying inflections of authority that had been completely absent during her previous interactions. "Venom Strike Unit, final operational status." The words hit like physical impacts as their meaning became clear. Cobra 7 had been mentioned in classified briefings as one of 3 surviving operatives from Venom Strike's final mission, personnel so effective and dangerous that their continued existence represented both an invaluable asset and a potential security concern of the highest magnitude. Colonel Whitman's body responded to recognition before his conscious mind fully processed the implications. His hand snapped to his forehead in a perfect salute that acknowledged not just Sloane's revealed identity, but the operational authority and security clearance that her status represented within military hierarchies that extended far beyond standard training protocols. The sight of their commanding officer saluting someone they had been treating as entertainment triggered automatic responses throughout the assembled group. Every recruit with sufficient military background found themselves standing at attention as ingrained respect for authority overrode their personal feelings and previous assumptions about social hierarchies. Pierce released his grip and stepped backward, his face showing the same mixture of shock and recognition that was spreading through the crowd like wildfire. His family connections had provided enough exposure to classified information for him to understand that he had just physically attacked someone whose operational status made her effectively untouchable within military justice systems. The sound of approaching footsteps drew attention to a figure emerging from the administration building with measured pace and unmistakable authority. General Keaton Winslow's appearance on the training grounds was unprecedented, as his position within the Pentagon hierarchy normally kept him far removed from basic recruit training activities. General Winslow's uniform was adorned with ribbons and decorations that spoke to decades of service at the highest levels of military command. But his attention was focused entirely on Sloane with an intensity that suggested personal rather than professional interest in the situation's development. Cobra 7, General Winslow said as he approached, his voice carrying warmth and familiarity that contradicted the formal military protocol surrounding their interaction. "I've been wondering when you'd surface again." The conversation that followed revealed layers of history and relationship that extended far beyond official military structures. General Winslow had been Venom Strike's commanding officer during its operational period, making him one of only 3 people with sufficient authority and security clearance to confirm Sloane's identity and explain her presence at Quantico. The communication device that triggered this investigation, General Winslow explained to Colonel Whitman while maintaining visual contact with Sloane, represents technology that was developed specifically for Venom Strike operations. Its possession requires security clearance that exists at levels most personnel never encounter. The explanation transformed the equipment violation from misconduct into evidence of classification so high that standard investigation procedures were inadequate to handle the security implications. Sloane's possession of such technology wasn't unauthorized. It was simply classified beyond the scope of normal military training protocols. Beckett's phone trembled in his hands as he realized that every moment of harassment and humiliation he'd recorded was now evidence of his systematic abuse of someone whose operational status placed her far above his own position within military hierarchies. His social media documentation of the day's events had transformed from entertainment into potential evidence of serious misconduct. The flashback that followed provided essential context for understanding Sloane's presence at Quantico and her motivation for maintaining such careful concealment of her true capabilities and background. 5 years earlier, Venom Strike's final mission had required infiltration of an international terrorist network that was planning coordinated attacks across multiple civilian targets. Sloane had spent 18 months undercover within the organization, developing intelligence and positioning that ultimately enabled her to prevent attacks that would have killed hundreds of innocent people, while simultaneously destroying the terrorist network's operational capacity and leadership structure. The mission's success had come at enormous personal cost, requiring her to maintain cover identities that involved witnessing and participating in activities that left psychological scars no amount of debriefing could fully address. When offered continued operational assignments following the mission's completion, she had requested release from active duty and permission to disappear into civilian life. Her presence at Quantico represented an attempt to reconnect with military service, on terms that would allow her to contribute without returning to the isolation and moral complexity of special operations work. She wanted to serve, but she needed to do so as part of a community rather than as a lone operator whose effectiveness depended on maintaining emotional distance from everyone around her. The cascade of consequences that followed her revealed identity, reshaped every aspect of the training program's social and administrative structure. Pierce's formal apology was delivered with genuine remorse as he understood the magnitude of his misconduct and the grace Sloane had shown in not responding to his provocations with the lethal force her training had provided. Camden and Arden faced disciplinary procedures that would likely end their military careers before they properly began. Their systematic harassment of a classified operative representing conduct that no amount of family connections or athletic achievement could excuse or mitigate. Beckett's social media empire collapsed as his recorded harassment went viral for reasons completely opposite to his intentions, transforming him from entertainment provider into cautionary tale about the dangers of assumptions and cruelty directed toward people whose backgrounds and capabilities remained unknown. Quinn Merrick found herself recognized and promoted based on her observational skills and willingness to look beyond surface appearances when assessing her fellow recruits. Her early recognition of Sloane's hidden competencies demonstrated exactly the kind of analytical thinking that military leadership valued in future officers. Colonel Whitman received orders that placed him in charge of developing new training protocols designed to identify and prevent the kind of systematic harassment that Sloane had endured. His oversight of the situation that had allowed classified personnel to be mistreated required immediate correction through institutional changes that would protect future operatives seeking reintegration opportunities. The entire recruit training program underwent immediate review and modification to incorporate lessons learned from Sloane's experience. New regulations prohibited harassment based on appearance or background, while enhanced screening procedures were designed to identify personnel with classified backgrounds who required special handling during their training period. But perhaps the most significant consequence was General Winslow's offer to return Sloane to active special operations duty, presented with the understanding that her unique skills and experience represented irreplaceable capabilities that the military desperately needed for ongoing national security challenges. Sloan's response to this offer revealed the strength of character that had carried her through years of dangerous operations and months of careful concealment among people who had no understanding of her true nature or the sacrifices she had made in service to their safety and freedom. "General," she said with quiet dignity that commanded absolute attention from everyone present, "I came here to learn how to be normal, not to return to being exceptional. I respectfully request permission to complete my training as a regular recruit and serve in whatever capacity you determine appropriate for my non-classified capabilities." The request demonstrated humility and wisdom that impressed even veteran military officers who had spent careers observing how power and recognition affected personnel at every level of service. Sloan was voluntarily choosing anonymity and community over the special treatment and isolated authority that her background could have provided. General Winslow's acceptance of her request carried weight that extended far beyond individual personnel decisions. His order that all personnel maintain absolute secrecy regarding Sloan's true identity represented official recognition of her choice to pursue normal military service despite capabilities that placed her among the most effective operatives in American military history. The evening that followed transformation was marked by subtle but profound changes in how every recruit approached their interactions with fellow trainees and their understanding of the assumptions they made about people based on limited surface information. Sloan returned to her corner table in the mess hall, eating the same regulation meal from the same standard tray, but now surrounded by a respectful distance that acknowledged her revealed status while honoring her expressed desire for normal treatment. She secured her communication device in a locked personal storage container, symbolically separating her classified past from her chosen present, while maintaining the capability to respond if genuine emergencies required her unique skills and experience. The routine of preparing for sleep followed familiar patterns as she organized her gear with the same methodical precision she had shown throughout the day. But now her actions carried different meaning for observers who understood they were witnessing someone whose competence had been forged through experiences most people couldn't imagine surviving. As darkness settled over the barracks, Sloan's encrypted communication device activated with an incoming message that appeared on the secure display with priority indicators that suggested urgent operational requirements. The text was brief, but carried implications that threatened to disrupt the peaceful existence she was trying to build. "Cobra 7, old friend is back, need your help, Ghost." The message hung on the screen like a bridge between the life she was trying to leave behind and the responsibilities that her unique capabilities made impossible to completely abandon. Ghost had been Venom Strike's final commanding officer, someone whose operational death had been confirmed through multiple sources and official documentation. Sloan stared at the message for long minutes, her finger hovering over response options that would either commit her to returning to the shadows or definitively close the door on a past that continued to reach into her present. The choice represented everything she had been trying to resolve through her presence at Quantico. Finally, she powered down the device without responding, placing it back in the storage container and turning away toward her narrow military bunk. But sleep came slowly as she wrestled with questions about duty, capability, and the extent to which exceptional people could ever truly choose ordinary lives. When morning arrived, Sloan rose with the same quiet efficiency she had shown throughout her time at Quantico, preparing for another day of training with the mechanical precision that had carried her through countless dangerous situations. Her uniform was standard issue, her equipment regulation, her appearance unremarkable. But something in her eyes had changed, a subtle alertness that suggested the message had awakened instincts and awareness that normal military service might not be sufficient to satisfy. The barracks around her stirred with the familiar sounds of recruits beginning another day, but the atmosphere carried a different quality now. Conversations were more subdued, movements more respectful, as though the revelation of her true identity had fundamentally altered the social dynamics that governed their interactions. Even those who hadn't been directly involved in the previous day's confrontations seemed to sense that something significant had shifted in their carefully ordered world. Quinn Merrick approached her bunk with careful steps, her promotion to squad leader evident in the new insignia on her collar. "Sloan," she said quietly, using the name that had become both truth and cover story. "The morning brief has been moved to the main auditorium. Colonel Whitman wants to address the entire training group." The information was delivered with professional courtesy that maintained appropriate distance while acknowledging the respect that Sloane's revealed capabilities demanded. Quinn had learned to navigate the complex social territory between treating her as a fellow recruit and recognizing the operational authority that her background represented within military hierarchies. Sloane nodded her acknowledgement, her response carrying the same measured tone she had maintained throughout her time at the facility. "Thank you for the information." The exchange was brief, professional, and carried undertones of mutual respect that reflected how dramatically their relationship had evolved over the course of a single day. As they moved through the corridors toward the auditorium, Sloane noticed the subtle changes in behavior that marked how institutional culture was adapting to accommodate her presence. Recruits stepped aside with respectful deference, their movements unconscious but unmistakable in their acknowledgement of someone whose capabilities exceeded their own understanding. The main auditorium buzzed with nervous energy as 300 recruits filed into seats that had been arranged to accommodate the largest gathering since their arrival at Quantico. The formal setting suggested that whatever Colonel Whitman intended to address carried implications that extended far beyond routine training updates or administrative announcements. Pierce Ellery sat in the front row, his posture reflecting the weight of consequences that had transformed him from predator to penitent over the course of 18 hours. His family connections and social advantages had proven inadequate protection against the military justice system's response to his systematic harassment of classified personnel, and his future in military service remained uncertain pending formal review of his conduct. Beckett Crowley was notably absent from the gathering, his discharge papers having been processed during the early morning hours, as Pentagon officials moved quickly to contain the security implications of his recorded harassment and social media distribution of classified personnel interactions. His father's general stars had been insufficient to protect him from consequences that threatened operational security at the highest levels. Colonel Whitman took the podium with the bearing of someone whose career had been fundamentally altered by the previous day's revelations. His introduction was brief and direct, acknowledging that recent events required immediate changes to training protocols and institutional culture that had allowed systematic misconduct to flourish unchecked. "Yesterday's events have demonstrated serious deficiencies in our evaluation procedures and social standards," he announced, his voice carrying across the silent auditorium with authority that brooked no argument. "Effective immediately, this facility will implement comprehensive reforms designed to prevent harassment and ensure that all personnel receive treatment consistent with military values of respect and dignity." The reforms he outlined were sweeping in scope and immediate in implementation. New regulations prohibited any form of harassment based on appearance, background, or perceived capabilities, while enhanced oversight procedures would monitor recruit interactions for signs of systematic misconduct or abuse of authority. But perhaps most significantly, the training curriculum would now include mandatory education about the dangers of assumptions and the importance of recognizing that surface appearances rarely reflected true capabilities or worth. Sloane's experience would become a case study in military leadership courses, though her identity would remain classified to protect operational security. Sloane listened to these announcements with the same calm attention she brought to all official briefings, her expression revealing neither satisfaction nor concern about the institutional changes being implemented in response to her experience. The reforms were necessary and appropriate, but they also represented a level of attention and disruption that she had hoped to avoid through careful concealment of her background. During the break that followed Colonel Whitman's presentation, Sloane found herself approached by Sawyer Price, whose intervention had provided the catalyst for exposing Camden's score manipulation and beginning the process of revealing the systematic misconduct that had characterized her treatment. "I wanted to thank you," Sawyer said quietly, his voice carrying genuine gratitude mixed with embarrassment about his initial reluctance to speak up about obvious wrongdoing. "Your example taught me that doing the right thing matters more than avoiding social consequences." Sloane's response reflected the wisdom that came from years of understanding how individual choices created ripple effects that extended far beyond immediate circumstances. "You found your courage when it mattered," she replied. "That's what determines character, not the absence of fear, but action despite it." The conversation was brief but meaningful, representing the kind of positive influence that Sloane hoped to exercise through her presence at Quantico. Her goal wasn't to intimidate or dominate, but to demonstrate through example that strength could be expressed through service rather than self-promotion. As the day progressed through standard training exercises, Sloane found herself occupying a unique position within the social hierarchy that had formed around the recruits. Her revealed capabilities commanded respect and deference, but her explicit choice to remain among them as an equal created space for genuine relationships to develop based on mutual respect rather than fear or hero worship. During weapons maintenance, she worked alongside recruits who now understood that her seemingly effortless competence reflected years of professional training and operational experience. Her willingness to share knowledge and assist struggling classmates demonstrated that exceptional abilities carried responsibilities for lifting others rather than simply showcasing superior performance. The afternoon brought individual counseling sessions with military psychologists who had been brought in to assess the psychological impact of the previous day's revelations on all personnel involved. Sloane's session focused not on her own mental state, which military records confirmed had been thoroughly evaluated following her transition from active operations, but on her integration into normal military life and the sustainability of her chosen path. How are you adjusting to the reduced stimulation and challenge level of standard military training? The psychologist asked, her questions designed to identify potential problems before they manifested in behavioral changes or dissatisfaction that could affect her continued service. Sloane's response reflected careful consideration of the complex emotional territory she was navigating between her operational past and chosen present. "The simplicity is refreshing," she admitted. "For the first time in years, I can focus on building rather than destroying, on learning rather than surviving." But even as she spoke these words, her mind returned to the encrypted message that waited in her storage container, like a dormant bomb whose activation could shatter the peaceful existence she was constructing. Ghost's reappearance suggested that the past she thought she'd left behind might not be as definitively concluded as official reports had indicated. Evening mess provided another opportunity to observe how fundamentally the social dynamics had shifted since her identity revelation. The corner table where she had previously sat in isolation now drew respectful glances rather than mocking stares, while conversations throughout the facility carried undertones of the lessons that her experience had taught about assumptions and prejudice. Arden Hollis approached during the meal with obvious nervousness, her athletic confidence replaced by genuine remorse about her role in the systematic harassment that had characterized Sloane's early days at Quantico. "I owe you an apology," she said simply. "And more than that, I need to understand how I became someone who would attack another person for no reason except that she seemed different." The conversation that followed explored themes of privilege, assumption, and the social dynamics that enabled cruelty to flourish in institutional settings. Sloane's responses reflected understanding rather than condemnation, focusing on growth and learning rather than punishment and shame. "Everyone makes choices about how they treat people who seem vulnerable," Sloane explained. "The important thing is learning from those choices and deciding who you want to be going forward." Her wisdom came from personal experience with moral complexity and the understanding that redemption was possible for those genuinely committed to change. As night settled over the facility, Sloane returned to her quarters with the same methodical routine that had characterized her entire time at Quantico. Her gear was organized with military precision, her personal items secured according to protocols that had become second nature through years of operational experience. But the encrypted communication device in her storage container seemed to radiate presence even through locked metal, its silent message creating a tension between the normal life she was building and the exceptional responsibilities that her unique capabilities might still require her to shoulder. She opened the container and powered on the device, the secure screen displaying Ghost's message with the same urgent priority indicators that had marked countless previous operational communications. The brevity of the message suggested either extreme time pressure or security concerns that prevented detailed explanation. For long minutes, Sloane stared at the text while wrestling with implications that extended far beyond personal preference. Ghost's survival suggested that Venom Strike's final mission had been less conclusive than official reports indicated, while his request for help implied ongoing threats that might require her specific capabilities to address. The choice she faced represented everything she had been trying to resolve through her presence at Quantico. Could exceptional people ever truly choose ordinary lives, or did their capabilities create permanent obligations that transcended personal desires for peace and normalcy? Finally, she composed a brief response that acknowledged the message without committing to action. Confirm identity through established protocols. Will evaluate based on threat assessment and operational necessity. The reply maintained professional standards while preserving her autonomy to make decisions based on complete information rather than emotional appeals. After sending the message, she powered down the device and returned it to storage, but sleep came slowly as questions about duty and responsibility competed with her desire for the simple life she was building among people who accepted her as one of their own. The woman who had chosen anonymity was discovering that some responsibilities transcended personal preferences. As she joined the formation for morning exercises, Sloan Whitaker remained exactly what she appeared to be: a dedicated recruit pursuing military service with quiet competence and professional standards. But beneath that carefully maintained surface, Cobra 7 waited with the patient readiness of someone who understood that exceptional circumstances required exceptional responses. The training continued, the community accepted her, and life proceeded with the rhythm she had sought. But in the locked storage container, the communication device waited with the silent persistence of obligations that exceptional people could never completely escape. True strength, Sloan had learned, meant knowing when to hide and when to stand, when to blend in and when to step forward, when to be ordinary and when to be extraordinary. The choice would always be hers to make, but the capability to choose would always carry the weight of responsibility for consequences that extended far beyond personal preferences. The sun rose over Quantico Training Facility, illuminating another day of preparation for young people who would serve their country with honor and dedication. Among them walked someone whose own service had already exceeded anything they might accomplish, but who chose to walk beside them rather than above them. And in that choice, perhaps, lay the truest expression of strength that any warrior could demonstrate.